Oh, bloody hell, you lot. I know when I said you was walking round here to my lodgings any time, you were more than likely to, but I didn't bloody well mean all of you at the same time now, did I? What will Mrs. Inksy, my landlady, say? Have you met Mrs. Inksy? Bloody hell. Talk about George and the bloody dragon. Do you know, ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Inksy, I've heard that she's something of a widow woman. Yes, her late husband murdered, you understand, about this time some years ago. Mercy bloody killing in that case. Well, you know what I'm talking about, would you see her now, would you? Oh, well, bottoms up then. I would offer you some, you see, but no, I'm taking this purely on doctor's orders, no. Well, to introduce myself, you understand better. Alfred St John Merrimoon. That's where you find yourselves in these palatial digs. Hey, Mrs. Inksy's bloody finest. Oh, if you don't see her, you hear her banging away the bloody end of her bloody broomstick in a moment now. Yes, I'll get the Christmas decorations and I'm bloody well and good. Oh, didn't give me bloody time to fit a word in bloody edgeways. Alfred St John Merrimoon, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I'm quite prepared for some of you to say, oh, have I seen that debonair distinguished face before? Hey, you cheeky sword, it's me I'm talking about. Yeah. Well, professional actor, you see. On the professional stage, 4 years now, I care to mention. Ever since my debut with Bunbury Tontine Players all those moons ago. Well, you understand that's why I'm in this particular station. These digs, I mean, are Mrs. Inksy's, in between professional engagements. Mind you, I'm prepared, aren't I? That's why I'm dressed like such a bloody fool now. Mind you, don't know what your excuse is, lady. I'm looking at you there. I'm the one in the middle. Bloody hell. Here, is she with you? I was saying, wasn't I? Medicinal purposes. Oh, yes, that's all on account, you see, of my catching a nasty rash round Licky End all them years ago, when I was undertaking a professional tour around the regions of Birmingham and the northern hemisphere of the illustrious county of the Western Midlands. Oh, I've been around, I have, yes, the rumours was true, lady. Oh, the rumours was true. Well, minute I got here, Mrs. Inksy, bloody well going on at me. Wanted to go up into the attic and act to bloody Christmas decorations. Why can't I even get my bloody coat off first? Well, I won't tell you what she said. Now, thrust a handful of post into my sweaty mitt, she did the minute I got in. Probably bills, I imagine, this time of year. What the bloody hell is this? Christmas greetings from the bloody church army. Piss off. Oh, yes. Postcards, you understand? My fellow professional performers on the professional stage, or not as professional as me, mind you. Oh, I really don't know why my landlady, Mrs. Inksy, does take on so. Why, I mean to say, I'm fully paid up now, aren't I, with my rent? Oh, well, I mean to say I will be a fortnight next Tuesday. Will I pay my rent? Well, I used to say I usually do my best to pay my rent. Well, I used to say I would pay my rent, wouldn't I? If I'd have backed a bloody agent. Well, have any of you seen my bottom? Well, I tell you, I studied Shakespeare. And I saw my bottom years ago, still wake up in the dead of night and think about it with fondness and affection. Oh, as to the ladies what saw my leer still can stop them in their tracks. 20 paces it can. Yes, so have you seen my leer? Oh, you look a nice, very la-di-da. That's why I'm here, isn't it, eh? No, let us fight altercation with my theatrical agent, insisting I was that I want a bit of legitimate theatre. I've studied Shakespeare, mind you. No, I don't mean the bloody statue in the library. Bloody hell! Welcome to my digs. Now, I would offer you some of this, you see, but that's the trouble I always find. There's always so much bloody night left at the end of the bloody sherry. No, I used to be on friendly terms with a landlord down at the railway tavern. Oh, down Cornwall way. Have any of you been travelling as far as Cornwall? Oh, no, only as far as the off-licence down at the end of your street. Oh, right you are, lady, right you are. Well, got on rather famously. With Mr. Shropshire I did at the Railway Tavern, and now every year since then, come rain or shine, or bloody soot, fog or smog, he sends me up a crate of 20 bottles of his finest sherry wine. Shittertons. No, I know what you're saying, don't laugh now, don't laugh. No, they named it after the tiny little village where they brew it. It's lovely. You know, it's a fine vintage. It can be dated back as far as last month, it can. Oh, it goes down very nicely indeed. It goes down very nice indeed. Oh, no, I'm looking at you, lady, when I say that, mind you. Mind you, Chubby, it does leave something of a sour taste in the mouth. That's why you have to have a little tot of this to take away the nasty taste, you understand? Oh, no, purely on doctor's orders, you see. Oh, I contracted a bit of a rash round the mendips. Oh, when I was performing, you understand, round the Shire of Gloucester. Oh, talking of Gloucester, lady, have you been? Oh, no, if you do, it's down the hallway, second on the right. What is this here? Oh, bloody hell. Santa Claus brings love and cheer, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Oh, bloody hell. Oh, you know, I thought he was dead. Redvers de Vere. Any of you heard of Redvers de Vere? Oh, shut your traps, you might learn something by you. Redvers de Vere. Well, he found himself in something of a similar situation to what I am in now. I mean to say resting, but nonetheless dressed in a suitably professional apparel, just in case a call should be made on the telephone downstairs in the hallway of Mrs. Hinks's. Oh, if ever it is that Mr. de Vere happens to be finding himself at this festive time of year. Oh, it's very nice. Well, he can't be dead after all. Or at least if it is, I'd hate to think of the postage. Oh, he's asking me how I am. Yes, very well. Yes, lovely. I couldn't stand the bloody man myself. Mind you, he was always useful for telling me when there may be situations vacant going on the professional stage. Oh, did I mention, ladies and gentlemen, I am a professional performer ever since my debut with... Oh, I see, I did. Mind you, now it's Christmas time, and seems you're all here. Are you seated well at the back? What? Yes, I'm talking to you. Well, never mind. No, you want to mind, you see. You there at the back, you want to mind how you go, sitting down upon that chair, what I found out at the garden shed. Well, I had to make a nice little party of mice homeless on account of you. Well, if I'd known he was all going to turn up here, I'd have made more of an effort. I mean to say, I'd have made sure Mrs. Bloody Inksy had done a bit of housework round the place. Any of you married here tonight, ladies and gentlemen? Oh, aren't you? Oh, not to fear, sir, not to fear. You can't be happy all your life now, can you? Oh, Redvers de Vere, he wasn't happy either. Oh, I remember. Not that he was married, mind you, no. On account of rather an uncanny experience what he was telling me about. In a tavern of our mutual acquaintanceship about this time last year, as a matter of fact. Now, what he had to tell me has some bearing upon why I'm dressed like such a bloody idiot now, I mean. Well, that jolly old elf, Father Bloody Christmas, eh? Well, never you mind, oh. If you're nice and well-behaved, old Father Christmas might bring you something nice and tasty by way of a treat to have later on this evening. Oh, I had a quick word with Mrs. Inksy. Oh, she can work wonders, you see, with half a pint of stout and a block of suet. Oh, works wonders, you see, brings bloody tears to a man's eyes, it does. And as for what I've seen her do with a cucumber, bloody hell. No, now you're all here, I may as well tell you what Redvers de Vere, another professional performer, said to me. As far as I recollect, ladies and gentlemen, it happened to go a little bit like this. What I mean to say is I hadn't mentioned to Mr. Merrimoon. Well, this time last year, as a matter of fact, we actors have to break bread as well, do we not? We cannot always be fasting. We must subsist upon more than the sound of an enthused audience, the glamour of the footlights, the allure of the greased paint. It was a matter of fact, my darling friends. That is why I had to put my reputation in the back of my wardrobe. Well, sadly, I was bereft of professional engagements this time last year. I happen to be bemoaning the fact also to your friend mine, Mr. Merrimoon. That is why a darling woman answering to the name Mrs. Matron. You understand Mrs. Matron, do you not? Or any of you happen to be familiar with the Matron familias? No? Oh. The pleasure is all mine, you darling, darling people. Oh, I mean to say Tyburn Grange. Oh, that's right. Oh, that's right, just in the county yonder. You've been there as well. Well, yes. Well, I don't know what I would have done. Oh, really, it had been several months by then since my agent... Well, I use the word agent in the loosest possible sense. If only my agent had the good sense to see beyond the end of his nose, instead of fawning and falling at the feet of the first pretty and attractive young actor that happens to come a-knocking upon his door. Well, I realise my days of being a romantic lead, alas, are far, far behind me. And now it betides me... my years as being a character actor, alas, lie before me like a vast withering wilderness. And so I say I was rather thankful that Mrs. Matron up at the Grange, upon noticing that I was kicking my heels somewhat in between professional engagements, inquired whether perhaps I would be willing, nay, would I be able to portray that jolly old elf, Father Christmas, now you understand, darlings. Mrs. Matron had an idea that she was to stage a festive soiree up at the Grange, or for her young son, William, and also for any number of his school friends. Well, the villagers absolutely rammed to the rafters with them. Beastly little hooligans. Still, at this time of year, one must count one's blessings. At least I considered I was not forced to resign myself to performance within one of those ghastly things. Pantomimes. Now, I know what you may be saying, darlings. Oh, but Mr. de Vere, where is your career? Oh, behind you, sir, behind you. Oh, you absolute bitch. Well, I realize, of course, pantomime is fine enough for certain performers of my acquaintance, but good heavens, no. Redvers de Vere would not dream of sullying his hands with such a thing. Why? Do you expect me to be seen frequenting a music hall, performing to the hoi polloi with a pantomime at this time of year? You might as well expect to see the likes of Mr. Stanley Looping treading the boards of the illegitimate theatre in a production of the Scottish play. Still, she was promising me, Mrs. Matron, I mean to say, a cash in hand, and even professional actors have bills to pay. We have gas meters to feed with our shilling pieces, do we not? Well, I remember it was upon rather a bleak December afternoon when I trudged up rather forlornly, I'm prepared to admit, to the tradesman's entrance. Of the Grange. You understand, Mrs. Matron, wonderful woman. She was so concerned that some of her little darlings, those rascals and monsters, I mean to say, may espy me, fully attired in my costume, or she wished for them to believe in the magic of the season for a few years longer at the very least. Yeah. And so there I was, knocking upon the door of the kitchen as though I were delivering the coal. Which way to the coal hole, Mrs. Matron? Which way to the coal hole, indeed? Well, she thanked me enough. She was charm itself. Oh, no, I said, I happen to be in between professional engagements. Well, I happen to have already arrived at my performance space, attired, you understand. Well, one never knows precisely, does one? The calibre of the dressing rooms one is liable to be given. Well, I have toured the provinces, you understand. But nonetheless, Mrs. Matron led me upstairs to one of the guest bedrooms. Oh, yes, have you seen the Tyburn Grange? Well, she said to me, I ought to while away the next quarter of an hour or so. Now, she will come to fire me in 15 minutes' time. Now, I was to prepare myself. Well, you understand, all we professional performers ought to be given the half and the five. And then, when the time was meet, she was to meet me in the hallway, and then I was to betake myself to the study, which presumably was downstairs somewhere. Well, I looked at my reflection forlornly. I mean to say, in the looking-glass in that guest bedroom, alas, how the years were taking their toll. Now, I had taken the precaution of growing my own set of mustachios and beard. Well, I do hate the adhesive gum that causes irritation upon the skin. I do have rather delicate tissues. Alas, I noted with a pang of chagrin that the streaks in my own facial hair were at least as resplendent as that in that specimen that I found draped upon the end of the bed. Oh, good heavens! I hesitated to consider how many families of moths and mice and other vermin down the earth had given consideration to nesting within the foul confines of the same. No, behave yourself, Redvers, behave yourself, dear. I ought to be thankful, after all. This was gainful employment, I suppose. Finally, a quarter hour passed. I heard my name being uttered discreetly from the hallway below. Mr. De Vere, are you there, Mr. De Vere? It took me back, ladies and gentlemen, as I said to Mr. Merrimoon himself, to those 40 seasons or so before, when I was in my youth. I was yet to attain the full bloom of manhood, and I was Romeo. Dear, dear Antoinette's Juliet. Oh, I'm here, my young Lothario, I'm here. If only my audiences could see me now. And so I made my way out upon the hallway, and there indeed was Mrs. Matron, O'Charm herself, beckoning her jolly old elf Father Christmas down the stairwell. Well, already in the distance I could hear some of those beastly monsters, I mean, of the young children gathering. Yes, some of the friends of her young sons. What was his name again, Mrs. Matron? Oh, yes, William, of course. How on earth could I have let it slip my mind? Yes. Now, Mrs. Matron informed me I was to while away the next half an hour or so within the study. Well, I suppose I've spent time in more lacklustre dressing rooms down the years, have I not? No, and there would be a knock upon the door when my cue was on time, and when my entrance stage left was desired. Well, already, you understand, as I gazed out through the French windows, I noted how the sun was setting into the horizon. And those few choice lines of Mr. Thomas Hardy came to mind, apropos the rime of the frost upon the barren winter gate. And then suddenly, I know not why, I gained the distinct impression, ladies and gentlemen, that I was being regarded. I spun around, and indeed my surmise was correct, and I was being perused, scrutinized, as a matter of fact, by a rather dashing gentleman. I felt such an ass. No, if Mr. Merrimoon himself were here, he would confirm what I have simply said. I felt such a fool. I mean to say, how to explain my presence there, in this kind gentleman's study, dressed in this outlandish and a buffoonish apparel. Well, he introduced himself, you understand. But of course, Mr. Matron, Well, I explained to him in less time now than it will take for me to explain to all of you why I was there. Oh, he smiled. Wonderfully charming gentleman was Mr. Matron. He said to me that, as a matter of fact, in a fashion of speaking, that is why he was back at the Grange that afternoon. Well, it was all to be a divine surprise for his young son, William. Why is that, I asked. Well, Mr. Matron said, almost a year before, he had rather suddenly been called away. Well, I looked at Mr. Matron. He was obviously a professional gentleman. Oh, business. A man of business, I thought. No, one can always sense whenever one is in the presence of quality. Well, Mr. Matron went on to say that his young boy William was absolutely heartbroken when he had to take his leave. However, one of the last things that Mr. Matron had said to his broken-hearted boy that he would do everything possible to be back home in time for Christmas next. Although he urged me not to breathe a word of this, either to William or indeed to his wife, Mrs. Matron. You understand, if I did, then A rather sweet surprise would be quite spoiled for all concerned. Oh, but of course. Oh, I did rather enjoy being made au fait with the Machiavellian secrets that were flapping and fluttering hither and thither like so many festive butterflies and moths. Your wish is my command, Mr. Major. Now, at that precise juncture, a rat-a-tat-tat upon the study door. Oh, Mr. Machin, that must be your wife, Mrs. Machin. Nothing more was required for me to say. No, like a seasoned professional indeed. Mr. Machin took himself to the rather large, amply proportioned Chesterfield chair that was just over there, and with the back of the chair turned toward the door. Indeed, if I had not known better myself, even I would have hesitated as to say whether or not there was actually anyone seated there. After all, well then, Mrs. Matron herself came into the room. Are you ready, Father Christmas? Oh, I mean to say, oh, ho, ho, ho. Well, that is what the ghastly little monster... No, I mean those charming little children expect their Father Christmas to say, is it not? Lead the way. Which, of course, she did. Now, the drawing room to which I, Redvers de Vere, was led was absolutely awash with these ghastly hooligans, little terrors, crawling left and right, no matter where my eyes rested, there they were, like so many mischievous monkeys. We ought to have seen them. Already some of them had opened their presents. Well, I insisted that all those who had not yet done so, please hold your hands, stay, for now Father Christmas is here. I will insist upon there being a degree of politeness, of decorum. You are both for a polite cue. Boys to my left, girls to my right. Although that being said, you ought to have seen some of the prizes, some of the Christmas presents that had already been opened. The wooden bayonets, the toy guns, and they were only the girls. Well, I ought to say, ladies and gentlemen, before too long I did rather find myself enjoying my professional engagement in spite of myself. Well, it was the festive time of year, after all, was it not? Now, I explained to the first little horror that was told to stand beside me the reason why I was there at the Grange in the first place. I happened to be steering of my sleigh, and of course my trusty posse of reindeer, high above the clouds, when one of these same beastly clouds happened to have become ensnared in one of the reindeer's antlers. Well, of course we had to land, didn't we? I mean to say, I had to land in order to pluck the gossamer stuff away. It wreaks absolute havoc with one steering, you understand. And so, looking down upon terra firma, I, or rather Father Christmas, explained to this beastly young monster that I decided to land in the grounds of Tyburn Grange. And it was whilst I was attending to my dear that Mrs. Matron happened to open the tradesman's entrance. And noticing that jolly old elf, Father Christmas, also was there, she wondered whether I would mind awfully, knowing full well that I'm a very busy man, although I would be somewhat busier had my ridiculous waste of space of an agent actually done his job. No, I mean to say, would Father Christmas mind awfully entertaining the children of the village, only for half an hour or so? Oh, I explained all of this to the first little hooligan who had been brought to my attention. Oh, had he been well behaved, and so on and so forth. Or by the looks of him, I could also see a catapult projecting from his trousers pocket. Ah, well behaved. I'll be the judge of that. But as I say, in spite of myself, I found myself flinging myself into the role as befits a professional actor. Or just ask Mr. Merrimoon himself. Well, that process of elimination, good heavens, I sounded rather like old Peter Whimsy then, didn't I? By process of elimination, the last child for Father Christmas to attend to must, of course, have been young William Machin. Well, I wished him to maintain his belief, did I not? That Father's secrets are safe with me, that I am to know all things, the names the little beasts I mean to say, of all the little boys and girls all over the globe. And so I said, "Oh, please come here, young William." Well, I saw a flicker of a smile dance across his face. Oh, the little angel. Well, of course, I went through the usual routine. Have you been well behaved this year? A shy little smile at first. Not from me, I mean from him. Are you looking forward to Christmas, young William? Oh, I could see Mrs. Matron standing behind him. Rather a protective mother, I thought, gently nudging her boy upon the shoulder to elicit responses as and when they were required. Oh, then I thought I ought to get to the matter in hand, my being Father Christmas, of course. Oh, ho, ho, ho. Finally, then, I said, "Well, tell me, William, given that you have been rather well-behaved this year," I would have to take his word for it, "is there anything in particular you would care to have for Christmas?" Now, I can't promise young William, you must understand, Father Christmas has many calls upon his attention throughout the year, particularly at this time of the month in December. Nonetheless, if you have been a good child, I will do all I can to see what I can see in my toy workshop back at the North Pole. Now, I noticed there was rather a thoughtful, if not earnest expression upon the little boy's face. "Now, go on, young William," I said. "It's quite all right." We mumbled something. I said, "Oh, good heavens, speak up, William, dear. I'm not as young as I am. No, as a matter of fact, I'm 917 years of age. Next summer." You see, I was flinging myself into the role, wasn't I? He then spoke up, and he said, "Well, Father Christmas, what I would like more than anything." "Oh, yes, do go on, dear boy, do go on." "Well, Father Christmas," he said, "what I would like more than anything is to see my father again." I found myself smiling to myself. Although, looking back, I seem to recall there being an abject look of horror flicker over the face of Mrs. Matron, the mother. Now, I said, "Well, young William, of course, I am Father Christmas, and it is well within my power to grant the wishes of every good little boy and good little girl all over the world." At this point, Mrs. Matron began gesturing wildly as though she was some form of turkey, having drawn the attention of the farmer, brandishing his chopper in his hand. And so once more I turned to the boy and I said, "Well, I believe you, young William, when you say you have been a well-behaved good boy this year." Again, that look of horror from Mrs. Matron is not very off-putting. And even as the boy looked at me, his smile bloomed into a grin. I said, "Yes, I rather think, although I can make no promises, William, my dear boy, that if you maintain your spotless record of good behaviour from between now and Christmas Eve itself, at which juncture, long after you are fast asleep, of course, I will return to the Grange, yes, you may well find that your father has been kind enough to come home in time for Christmas." Well, at that point, ladies and gentlemen, I said all of this to Mr. Merrimoon. By the looks on Mrs. Matron's face, you would have thought that I had trodden in mud all over her finest Persian rug. Well, young William, the poor boy, was bundled off into the hands of another grown-up, and then Father Christmas, which is to say, yours truly, that jolly old elf, was manhandled from the room and escorted at the business end of Mrs. Matron's arm into the hallway again, where she hissed through her teeth once the door to the sitting room was shut firm and fast behind us. "Oh, you fool, Redvers de Vere," she intoned. "You fool, if I did not know any better, I swear you had done that deliberately. Oh, please, Mrs. Matron," I interjected. "You must allow me to explain." Oh, she was incandescent with fury. She demanded to know what on earth had impelled me to say such a thing to her poor young boy. "Oh, good heavens, Mrs. Matron." I said, "No, I really regret that I am going to have to spoil what would have been rather a charming surprise, and indeed to break a solemn promise. Now, Mrs. Matron, if you'll be so kind as to follow me. But I interrupted her then, ladies and gentlemen, and I led her into the study. Oh, of course, her husband was not to be seen, because the Chesterfield chair had its back turned to the door. Well, she demanded to know, and I said, walking to the door, I said, well, I really am sorry. I did everything I could to keep your surprise for your charming wife and dear young son, but I'm sorry to say, I was running the risk of losing a professional engagement. And as I said that, I turned the chair around only to find that where on earth had Mr. Matron gone? Well, at that point, even as I was searching the room, surely Mr. Matron was concealed behind the curtains, I looked back to Mrs. Matron, and she had gone rather pale, almost indeed as though she had seen a ghost. And she said, "What did you say? What did you just say, Mr. Redvers de Vere?" Well, I said, "Why, Mrs. Matron, I was merely opining to your husband that it was with great regret I had been forced to ruin this surprise he had planned." "Oh, Mrs. Matron!" Well, at that point she staggered. Now, I could have sworn she was about to swoon, and I dashed to the fair maiden's side and escorted her to a chaise, upon which she draped herself for a few moments, whilst I endeavoured all I could to waft a cooling breeze across her fevered brow. When finally she had recovered her composure, I asked her whether she was well and what on earth I had done wrong. But once more she looked me square in the face, and she said, "Mr. de Vere, repeat again to me what you said a few moments ago." And I said, "Oh, madam, no, there really is no mystery to all of this. I did not wish to spoil the surprise. Well, for you, of course, but most especially for your young boy, William. Now, you see, I happen to be conversing with your husband here in the study." She stopped me again. "Good heavens, Mr. de Vere, don't you understand that it's absolutely impossible?" "Oh, why on earth is that, madam?" I rejoined. "Because, Mr. de Vere, my husband passed away a little less than a year ago this same afternoon." "Well, there you go. Oh, bloody hell, Mrs. Inksy, yes! Well, give me time to think here, can you? Oh, bloody hell, all my shitted and sherry has run dry as well. Well, I've got my hip flask, haven't I? Oh, purely for doctor's orders, you understand. Well, I've explained, haven't I, the men dips, leaky hills, and so on and so forth. Why, so it must be something I eat. Although I have to say, all this strange talk what Redvers de Vere said to me about this time a year ago rather puts me in mind of a curious little ghost story of my own, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I understand ever since my debut on the professional stage all those years ago with the Munray Tontine plays, it has been my pleasure, and not to say my responsibility and my honour, to perform any number of one-man shows, of course, at theatres and other venues the length and breadth of the British Isles, bringing to life some of the choicest works of Mr. Charles Dickens. Wonderful, bloody wonderful he is, very dear to my heart. Oh, some of you indeed might have seen my recitation of the Signal Man just a few months ago. Oh, yes, I thought I recognised you, lady. No, I barely recognised you standing up, mind you. How is the liver? Of course, all of Mr. Dickens' ghost stories were works of fiction, weren't they? Well, I mean to say, I still haven't quite made my mind up about that thing what Redvers de Vere said to me about under him when he was up at Tyburn Grange, hanging about, as it were. No, but I mean the ghost stories of Mr. Dickens and any of those other literary lots. Well, their stories have a beginning and an end, and probably something by way of a middle, in between the two. Now, as for myself, whenever people say, Mr. Merrimoon, have you ever encountered a ghost? Why, you must understand theatres tend to have their own store of folklore, ghosts, and wandering souls, you understand? And no, I don't mean to say those haunting the bar in hopes of there being time for last orders. I don't know, I'm looking at you, sir, when I say this. You, bloody hell. No, I think years ago I might have seen a ghost. But then again, I might not have, you know. No, looking back even now, I'm not entirely certain what happened. At that time when I might have had a supernatural encounter, I mean to say, all of my own. Well, I mean to say, ladies and gentlemen, me and my old man, my father, like bloody chalk and cheese we were. I mean to say, back in my place of birth, Pontyfloor, my father, like his bloody father before him, they'd all taken to the mines. Oh, I was all used to them, you see, coming home at all bloody hours at the end of their shift. Faces black as the bloody ace of spades they were. Oh, my father, he was a man of few words, and most of those was in bloody Welsh, and I couldn't speak a word of the bloody lingo. No wonder we didn't have much to say to each other, did we? Well, of course, I had to grow up eventually, didn't I? Happens to the best of us in the end. Well, I remember, my mother's fault, she happened to take me to a bit of Shakespeare, one of the larger theatres in Aberystwyth. And I remember being quite captivated, fascinated, as a matter of fact. Oh, I know, you ought to hear the sound of the bloody mice here. No, I said to Mrs. Inksy, she wants to get in some bloody mixture for them. Keep a man awake at night. No, I remember being absolutely fascinated when I saw that bit of Shakespeare on a professional stage. Oh, it quite determined my future course, I suppose. Well, you understand, I'd been bitten by the bug. No, I don't mean by the bug. Not that kind of bug, sir, no. No, in your case, I will say a bit of talcum powder ought to see you well. I mean to say, lady, not the nicest place to put a bit of sticking plaster now, is it? He won't take his sitting down, mind you. Well, he can't bloody well, can he? Well, of course, I used to say to my old man of my ambitions, he just rolled his eyes and waved that bloody arm of his in the air, and, oh, well. Mind you, I remain true to my convictions, my past convictions at that. Oh, finally I came of age. I remember the day it happened. My old mother was in the kitchen, boiling an onion, you'd have thought, by the look of her when she came into our front parlour, as a result of what was about to happen. No, my old man had come back from his shift down the bloody pit, face absolutely covered in coal dust. Oh, I don't know how it was we finally got talking about what I intended to do with the rest of my life. Oh, be that as it may, as these things often are. No, I merely reiterated my determination to pursue a life as a professional performer upon the professional stage, I mean to say. Well, he rolled his eyes. I said to him, hey, old man, roll those eyes any more. Bloody well pop out of your head, won't they? Oh, you ought to have heard my mother. Sharp bloody intake of breath there coming from the kitchen. Could have been the onions, mind you. Well, he said, Alfred, my boy, you can follow your dreams, but believe you me, a theatrical career is very uncertain. I know, I said. Whereas if you follow me, my father and my father's father before me, life down the mines may not be glamorous work, Alfred, but the pay is steady. Yes, well, I said to him, I know all about that. I know all about that, Dar, I said. You took your pick. As a matter of fact, I nearly broke my bloody neck over the thing, resting in the hall up against the bloody wall again. What might be good enough for you and Granda isn't good enough for me, Alfred St John Merrimoon. No, I rather fancy I could do better than the likes of you. Well, of course I regretted saying it, didn't I? As soon as the words had tumbled out of my mouth. I believe I could hear my mother gasp coming from the kitchen. My dad was silent for a while. I thought, oh, bloody hell, I'm in for it now, aren't I? All right you are, then, he said. Right you are, and then he nodded his head and rolled his eyes, and he got up and went into the kitchen to console Mother. Well, I left home not long after that. A case of leaving before I was pushed, I suppose. All tensions became rather strained. I did all right, I suppose. I didn't see much of the old man after that. Well, I mean, Christmases. Occasionally I'd find my way back in Pontyfloor, but I always considered it to be something of a failure. I mean to say, I'd been lured away by the bright lights of Aberystwyth, and Pontyfloor had lost whatever few charms it had to have. Even when we did see each other again, we didn't see much. No, as a matter of fact, looking back, I rather wish I had found the time to explain myself, you see. I couldn't even have been there if my old man's... Well, I mean to say, when he passed... Well, you understand, he'd always been a smoking man, I suppose, working down the mines all them years, couldn't have helped. He tried to contain his habit, though. No, he promised my own mother he would only smoke in between meals, and by the end he was down to 36 meals a day, and... I remember I was coming off the stage when I received word from one of the stage hands that my old dad had fallen ill. Of course, I happened to be entertaining a bloody room full of complete and utter bloody strangers, hadn't I? An actor's life for me. By the time I got back to Pontyfloor, already too late. I mean to say, for my old dad. Funny thing, I remember looking at him when I was in our front room, lying in state, lying inside his coffin. He looked so small. Well, I mean to say, he was lying down there, wasn't he? Well, I always say he didn't look that different to when he was in life. Well, he only spoke half a dozen words, on average in a year anyway. Do you know, my old man was late for his own bloody funeral, yeah? I remember we had hired the horse and hearse from Jones's, the undertakers. Of course, something must have made the horse bloody bolt for it, eh? We got as far as the next village before they'd been able to catch up with it. Of course, my old man, what with his condition... I said, well, even after death, you still could have done. We've been given something to stop that coffin of yours, eh? Was what you would have wanted. All those years, you understand, and I remember at the wake, thinking to myself, I wish I'd have had that opportunity to say it. I was sorry, and I didn't mean half the things I'd said. More to the point, I'd wished I'd said a bloody lot more than I ever had. I wouldn't have needed long, just a couple of minutes. Well, the reason why I'm saying all of this, I was at digs. Oh no, Mrs. Inks's, I mean to say, somewhere even bloody worse than this lot. Well, I was down on my uppers, I suppose. Been drinking rather more freely. Even for me, I mean. I didn't have much work. Resting, wasn't I? I'm feeling rather sorry for myself, as a matter of fact, in my sitting room. It's me and the cockroaches. Well, I got to the end of my shit-tons and I begun on the dregs of my hip flask. Funny thing is, I must have been well after midnight. I remember I could smell tobacco and to be right back, you understand. It was the brand what my old man had used to smoke. Well, I know what some of you will say, oh, Merrimoon, it's that bloody sherry of yours, but I wasn't that far gone. You see, I looked up in there. There. Standing the other side of the only other bloody stick of furniture I had to my name. But the old man, wasn't it? Eh? You're right, you said. Oh, no bad, I said. Well, you're looking well, I said. Why, me to say, give me your dead man. Took the weight off his feet, didn't he? Sat in the armchair, facing me, and I suppose for 5 minutes or more. I looked at him, and the old man looked at me. I don't know about you, but I felt bloody sober, in spite of all the shit-tons I'd had already that night, and I said... I said, well, it's a good thing you're here, Da. I know, he said. No, I don't think you do know, I said. We understand, Da, the fact of the matter is, I know you and me, we never got on. I know, he said. No, you don't know, Father, no, hear me out, I said. I've always regretted saying what I did that day. All right, you are, he said. No, allow me to explain. No, I mean to say, I never said sorry, did I? Right, you are, Alfred, he said. No, Da, you don't understand. I mean to say, I never had time, did I, to make amends. I mean to say, to tell you that, I know, Alfred, he said. And then he looked at me, and he said, you bloody silly sod. He said to me, all those times I would say, right you are. Roll my eyes and my head, wave my arm. Well, didn't you bloody understand that was me? Trying to say to you, I love you. Silly sod. I see, he said. He rolled his eyes. Well, something must have got into my bloody eye. A bloody pipe smoke of his, I suppose. We didn't say much more, but we just looked at each other and smiled. I remember hearing the mantel clock chime 2 and I remember looking back to where the old man was seated. I was about to say, oh, that reminds me, do you have clocks where you are? He's bloody well gone. I wiped my eyes. Why, me to say it was a bit of soot from the fireplace got into it, I expect. Well, he wasn't there, of course. I suppose I must have nodded off, but when I woke up the cold light of Christmas morning, I saw something was propped up on the mantel shelf. And what it was this was my old darse pipe, that is. I know what you might say. You say, oh, Merrimoon, you and that bloody shittertons. I see the shittertons didn't imagine this up now, did it? I keep it for luck. I mean, in the end, when all is said and done, I know me and the old man didn't always see eye to eye, and I know the few words what we did have in life were more often than not bloody cross ones, but in the end, I mean, all that matters to me is that eventually we had time to just 2 minutes to see what needed to be said. At Christmas Eve, a number of years ago, as far as I'm concerned, well, that was good enough for me. Of course, you might remember earlier on my acting acquaintance, Redvers de Vere, talking about Stanley Lupin, eh? Now, some of you might be familiar with Mr. Lupin's work, I mean to say, before they carted him off in a bloody box. He was the king of the pantomime dames. Well, of course, you might know him better by his theatrical persona, Dame Dolly Ding Dong, with the bonny bell of all bells. Oh, he had a little bell attached to every piece of his bloody anatomy, from the top of his head all the way to the tips of his toes. Well, lady, I say every piece of his anatomy, not every piece, no. It would be silly, wouldn't it? It was Dame Dolly Ding Dong, not Lady Ting-a-ling. But I remember having a little conversation about Stanley Lupin with a wonderful stage store manager of my acquaintance, Billy Whitlow, his name, I know, Billy Whitlow. Oh, yes, you had to like him, warts and bloody all. Not pointing the finger of blame at anyone, mark you. Oh, yes, he sort of grew on you, did he? Yes, I know, he'd heard of them before. Well, of course, I hadn't been on the professional stage. Did I mention I was a professional actor for that many years at the time? I happened to have fallen into conversation with Billy Whitelaw, and he was telling me how many years before he had the honour, I mean to say, to have witnessed Stanley Lupin, or Dame Dolly Ding Dong, perform, actually treading the boards there, at the Tivoli Theatre himself. Yeah, and seeing this whole postcard here, what Billy Whitelaw said to me, yeah, rather takes me back. In fact, I'm half inclined to say to you everything what Billy Whitelaw said to me all them years ago then. Of course, I have to say, Stanley Lupin was a natural performer. Oh, I know you can learn the tricks of the trade, and I know there are plenty of wee performers spending their apprenticeship, as it were, in repertory, but Stanley Lupin didn't have any of that. No, you could tell. Give him an audience of one or an audience of 2,000, his eyes lit up. His face came to life, and he was in his natural-born element. Now, I count my blessings I ever had the good fortune to meet him. Well, this happened years ago. I've been here at the Tivoli. man and boy now for more years than I care to mention. One of the many and varied duties of a stage door manager after hours to walk up to make sure everything is all above board and we haven't got any stragglers from the bar loitering around backstage. Well, I mean to say members of the public. We're used to finding performers back there. I was backstage and I could hear this wee curious knocking sound like someone was knocking on the side of a door to be let in or on the other side to be let out, I suppose. I made my way down the corridor. The noise seemed to be getting louder and louder, the nearer and nearer to Stanley Lupin's dressing room I got. "Are you all right, Mr. Lupin?" I called, and he said, "All right. Aye, Billy, it's quite all right. Come on in, why don't you?" Now, imagine my surprise. This knocking was coming from inside a wee cupboard there in the corner of his dressing room. "You're quite all right, Mr. Lupin." "Go, Miss Stanley," he said. "Yeah, you're quite all right, Stanley." "Well, why don't you have a look inside that cupboard there and you tell me?" Well, I thought he was having a wee joke at my expense, didn't I? I thought one of his wee stooges would be lying in wait, but I can laugh at myself as well I ought with a face like mine, and so I was game enough. I went over to the cupboard and I swung wide the door. Inside, there wasn't a single thing but a dressmaker's dummy. And then Stanley turned to me and said, "Allow me to introduce you to Jenny Wren." I looked at him and I didn't understand what he meant. And then he said, "Sit yourself down, Billy, and I'll tell you all about Jenny Wren, but to start with, I need you to know a little bit about my old mother." Well, then, I mean to say, I was born at a very young age. Well, most of us all are. We are. On the 22nd of December, 2013. I have to say, I was a grave and bitter disappointment to my old mother. Well, I mean, for years and years, she desperately yearned for a little daughter. And then when I came along, well, there was just a tiny little niggle between me and what she desperately wanted. It was on account of my little niggle that led to the beginning of our problems, I suppose. Nothing that will stand up in court, mind you. Of course, I don't blame the old man. My father, I mean, well, how could I? He scarpered even when I was a little boy. How can you blame someone what you ain't never met? Still, I can't help but think if only my father had hung around a little bit longer, it might have made things easier for my mother. I mean to say, before her mind started to go. Well, of course, theatre was in our blood. I remember seeing my first musical performance down Croydon way. But I still got relatives living there. As my mother, well, she used to do bits and pieces. She was a seamstress, bloody good one and all. That's how I got the theatre in my blood, I suppose. Well, father had left home, and I suppose she took it out on me a little bit. We didn't have much money to start with, so I had to be a bleeding dressmaker's dummy, didn't I? She got a degree of satisfaction by making me wear frocks. Frocks in her front room. Whenever I used to remonstrate and stand my own ground, she used to put a handful of pins and make me stand in the corner with them pins in my mouth. Well, I mean to say, if she wanted me to have more iron in my food, she ought to have said, eh? Well, first opportunity I got, I scarpered myself like my old man before me. That only made the old woman worse. That's where Jenny Wren, what you just met inside that cupboard, first come along. Enter stage right. Dressmaker's dummy, Jenny Wren, took over from where I left off. Just my mother and Jenny Wren talking to themselves. Well, I was young then, even more foolish then than I am now. I wouldn't have had pride to get in the way of making a stand. Still, I had relatives down that way, didn't I, Croydon? I used to make sure they'd check up on the old silly old cow every once in a while. Of course, it's that same old story. My mother, she took to drinking. It's a funny old thing, ain't it? You think your problems are too much to handle, so you turn to the gin, and then the gin makes them a bloody old sight worse. So it was with her, I mean. Well, she became erratic. What little bit of work she got around the music halls, that all began to dry up. I made sure I did the right thing by her. I sent her money back home. Till I began to suspect she was only spending it on the drink. That's when I sent it, courtesy of my cousins in Croydon way. They popped in and all just to make sure she was doing all right. I remember one day I had time to spare between the matinee and my evening performance, and I decided I would call in on the old dear, say hello to my mother. Do you know, she didn't even recognise me. It broke my heart, it did. She introduced me to Jenny Wren, mind you, and she said to me, do you know, it's a remarkable thing, but you do spare such a striking resemblance to Mr. Stanley Lupin. Has anyone ever said that? Well, funny you should mention that then. She kept talking about these shadows she could see in the corners of the room, where they kept trying to trip her up. I said, no, don't worry, I'll send the man round from the council. He'll sort that out for you. Nothing a bit of warm water and a bar of soap won't put right. Broke my heart, and I remember as I was making my way out, I tried to give her some money. I knew she'd only spend it on the gin, but she would not take it. She said no, she had some seamstress work coming along any day now, she said. Well, she heard that Sir Henry, he was due to tread the balls in town, and she felt certain that Sir Henry and Miss Ellen Terry, she felt certain that they would have need of her services. They had to turn away, and she would have seen me blow up my heart out. Of course, I don't pretend to say she was a good, well-behaved neighbour, bleeding out. I think that night, that Boxing Day night, when it all happened, I think that was rather dramatic, even by my old dear mother's standards. You understand, I was coming off the stage to the scenes of rapturous bleeding applause, I hasten to add, and dear old Arthur, you know Arthur, he was there in the wings. He said, Stanley, I'm sorry, I've got some bad news. Well, I knew it was my mother. He didn't have to go on. It already taken her away by the time I got to the old house. From the neighbours, I learned more or less what happened. You understand, my mother had put on a masterclass of histrionics that night, and the more philosophical neighbours in the street, they decided not to berate her through the paper thin walls. They actually took the trouble of going outside and crying QE through the letterbox, make sure she was all right. Mrs. Lupin, you in there? Well, eventually they didn't have no choice, did they? They had to send for the police, bleeding men in white coats, no doubt. She was taking on like a bleeding banshee in that house, she was, and then suddenly, silence. And the neighbour, he said that was worse than the noise she was making, because at least when you could hear the row, you knew that she was in there. But when it was dead quiet, you didn't know what the bleeding hell she was getting up to. Well, police officers, they finally turned up, waving their lanterns about. Yes, I know, lady. Well, they called to the letterbox, and there was no answer, so they had to get the bleeding door down. There goes the neighbourhood. So into the front room they go, shining their lanterns. I could imagine the first one crying out, bleeding hell, her head's dropped off, when they shone the light on Jenny Wren, I mean. And then they found my old mum. She was at Jenny Wren's feet, or at least she would have been if Jenny Wren had feet. She didn't have a leg to stand on. You understand, them shadows, what my old mother could see in the corners of the rooms. Well, they eventually got too much for her, and she was sick up to the eyeballs with them, as a matter of fact. So what she decided to do that Christmas was take matters into her own hands and do the one thing what would guarantee she would never have to look at them ever again. And she took two of the longest and sharpest knitting needles she had in her basket, and she poked them right into her eyes. So that's where she lay. There wouldn't have been no suffering, at least I hope not. I remember the next day I had to go to the mortuary to identify her, and I looked down and you silly old cat. You always did have to go on better than me, didn't you, hey? Oh, Mum. Well, of course, I felt rather honoured when Stanley had told me all of this. Well, it was the beginning of the next year. He began to have all of the old sticks of furniture moved out of his former home. A lot of it, of course, went to his own house, but eventually, on account of a number of eccentricities, these sticks of furniture had to be moved along here, Jenny Wren being one of them. It was a curious thing. Stanley said to me he'd be in his dressing room late at night, and from the corner of his eye he could swear he'd see the dressmaker's dummy move. He turned. He couldn't be sure. And yet there were some nights he'd locked Jenny Wren inside his dressing room, and when he came back to the theatre the next morning and opened up the door, she wouldn't be inside, but she would be all the way down the corridor. And quite a few of the other performers here, they began to grow agitated. Well, you know how superstitious theatre folk are. That's why he had to take to locking Jenny Wren inside that wee cupboard there, inside his old dressing room. And that wasn't all. There used to be a wee deal chair. Oh, it resided at the Lupin residence for a while, but got to the point where Mrs. Lupin wouldn't stand it no more, so Stanley had to have it brought here to the Tivoli. The chair, I mean, not his wife. There's always something rather queer about this chair of his. Always fell over to the left side. Now, I have to say, throughout the months when he was here at the Tivoli, it was amusing the first couple of times in rehearsals when this chair would go ass over face, and even a few of us would take turns seating ourselves in it ourselves and timing it almost on our wee pocket watches as to how long we could stay in the saddle, as it were, before we was tripped out. And we thought one of the legs may be shorter than the others, but word got around that it had come from the late Mrs. Lupin's property and gained a reputation for being a haunted chair, so that too was locked away in one of the rooms around here. You know how actors are. It wasn't long after that we started seeing the woman, the ghostly figure of a woman in black, haunting the corridors, and sometimes front of house and all. And she was an eerie figure enough. Always seemed to be feeling her way along the walls of the place, as though she was blind. And then, of course, we thought back to what had happened to poor Stanley's late mother, how she had ended her own life in such a sad fashion. Of course, we put two and two together, and the reason this must be none other than her. Members of the audience started claiming to see her as well. They'd be here for an evening show, and then they'd become less interested in what was going on stage, and more to the point, what was going on up there, in what ought to have been an empty box. That there'd be this eldritch and uncanny figure standing in there. Ghostly woman dressed all in mourning. And of course, members of staff began seeing her as well. I remember I was in my wee office counting down the hours till I might be let out to play again. It was cold for that time of year. I was locking up shop for the night. I was turning around, reaching out to my coat peg for my hat and jacket. Ah! Bloody hell, only to find wee Mrs. Lupin there standing in my way. Now, I wouldn't have thought a man of my size would have fitted through that wee window hatch, but all she saw was my wee legs wriggling away, and I was up and out of here. Others also, they began seeing we had a stage psychic, Mr. Isaac Shanley. He wouldn't consent to perform here again. He was in his dressing room, putting on the last finishing touches of stage makeup. He heard this funny sound as though one of his grease paint sticks had been flung across the room. He looked up at the mirror, only to find Mrs. Lupin regarding him steadfastly. Up! You know Marie? Oh, she's a godsend where the pantomimes are concerned. Oh, yes, she is, but you know she's not a woman to be crossed. Well, we was rehearsing pantomime this time last year. Oh, is it Christmastime? Things get worse around here at the Tivoli, and Marie had to go back to her dressing room to fetch something. She saw a woman standing outside her room. Any of you who know Marie know she's, isn't one to mince words. She began storming up to this interloper, demanding to know who she was and more to the point, what the bloody hell she's doing there. Marie reaches out to seize the woman by the shoulder, only for a hand to pass right through. And then the woman in black turned to face Marie. Except she didn't have no eyes, she had two deep and gaping blooded sockets. I'm surprised you didn't hear Marie's screams from where you are, ladies and gentlemen. We even had an exorcist come Here, with his phials of holy water, he decided he would bless the Tivoli and exercise the space. The last we saw of him was him running down the high street on account of having seen the ghost. I imagine the late Mrs. Lupin must be something of an atheist here, ladies and gentlemen. We could have put up with this, I suppose, but we was getting ready for opening night for the pantomime 2 or 3 years ago. Stanley was here and Marie. They looked up and there in the flies, Mrs. Lupin's ghost. There was a young stagehand up there, young Johnny. He was a bright lad. He had a promising career in front of him. He'd heard all about the stories regarding the ghost, and I imagine it still took him quite the fright when he looked around and Mrs. Lupin was coming toward him. "Watch out!" I didn't understand how it happened. He must have tripped over a coil of rope that was up there. All of us, Stanley included, saw him. Poor young Johnny stumble and trip and fall. And down 30 feet or more, down to the stage he fell. The sound of his bones snapping and cracking, I still remember. Young Johnny broke his neck there and then, I hope. And even as I rushed to Johnny's side, I looked up there and Mrs. Lupin was there one moment and then she was gone. Well, it was around that time Stanley Lupin himself took a downward turn. You remember that wee theatre critic, what was his name? Thorpe was his name. He wrote this scurrilous bit of nonsense criticising pantomime and Stanley Lupin. Well, ordinarily Stanley would laugh it off. Well, I think though he was blaming himself for the young stagehand's death. It wasn't his fault, Mark you. He hadn't recovered still from his mother taking her own life. And then that final scathing review attacking Dame Dolly and Stanley Lupin's lifetime work. There's a funny thing with Stanley. He could have an audience in the palm of his hand. Stanley Lupin could make 1,000 complete strangers burst into laughter or burst into tears on the turn of a sixpence, and yet he was the loneliest man in the world. Which I suppose eventually led to what happened. I told you about that chair, didn't I? The one that kept falling over onto its side. What we noticed after a while, it was always the left side it landed on, and quite became a joke here. Stanley eventually had it moved into his dressing room along with Jenny Wren. He said it will keep each other company. I remember I was early in that morning, and it was no surprise to know that Stanley would be in even earlier than I was. He was a perfectionist. He spent more time here at the theatre than he did at home. He was always improving bits of stage business, not for himself, but to make everyone else look good. Theatre was in his blood. And I heard this wee sound, and I went backstage along the corridor, and I saw the door to Stanley's dressing room was slightly ajar. "Are you there, Stanley?" And the nearer to that door I got, I began to grow uneasy, and it wasn't like it not to wish me good morning. And I opened the door, and I saw that chair again. You know, the one that always landed on its left side, not over. Just as though it had been placed there deliberate-minded. Well, that morning, ladies and gentlemen, as a matter of fact, the chair had been left that way. Deliberate, mark you. It was on account of my friend of yours, Stanley Lupin. The greatest of the pantomime dames we'll ever see. It was on account of him standing on that chair before he hanged himself. Bloody hell, all right, Mrs. Inksy, yes, I'll get your bloody Christmas decorations. Oh, I can't apologise enough, really, ladies and gentlemen. I have to ask myself, do any of you have homes to go to? I really don't know by the looks of you, especially you, lady, but I've got work to do, even if some of you don't. I would say Merry Bloody Christmas, but I daren't in case that makes you think you're welcome here. I hope all of you spend Christmas times with your loved ones, or feeling that with your families. And furthermore, I hope that you all find everything in the twine of your stockings what you've bloody well been hoping for all year long. In parting, ladies and gentlemen, all I can say is I hope your Christmas is a merry affair, and that the new year is a bloody sight better than the old one has been. I think we can all say, can't we? The year that we'll say goodbye to now has been an absolute annus horribilis, which is to say, a complete and utter arsehole of a year. Until we meet again, Merry Bloody Christmas.